Hey, Sean.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Great. Great, 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 great. Let's see. What am I looking at here? All right. Got Randy. There you are. Randy, can you hear me? I don't think Randy can hear me yet.
I can hear you.
Great. Welcome. It's good
Hi,
to
how
see you.
are you?
I'm great. How are things going?
Busy, but good.
Busy, but good. Well, those wonderful teenage children of yours, I'm sure they're being helpful.
Oh, very.
Yes, two of the most beautiful children you have ever seen. I couldn't believe they were her. Did not appear old enough to have children that size, but just marvelous children, well spoken, beautiful children. I was very honored to meet them.
Well, thank you.
Very, very nice children. Um, did Randy, were you able to pick up the YouTube video from last week? Did that work for you?
Yes, I looked at it and looked through everything.
Great, great. That was just an orientation to all the materials that we had. I have added a discussion prompt this week. So let me see if I can show y'all how to get to it. That's the only thing that's really new. I'll add these discussion prompts kind of go along with the weekly assignments on that weekly schedule. Let me make sure that I show you that. Let me do a share screen here. On this weekly schedule, let's see this thing. This weekly schedule. So this week, preventive law, developing risk and crisis management plans, locate copies of your school emergency plans, read school law, and assess the plan. So where it says assess the plan, what I've done is I have what I have done is if you will go to course tools and go to discussion board, and then of course click on our course number, I put a little discussion. How long does it take you for you and your administrator to find the plan? Usually students say, we couldn't find it in the first hour. It took a half a day to find it. We wasn't laying around, anywhere close. But then the discussion prompt, and do not spend a lot of time. Remember, these are 10 or 15 minute things. According to what you read, is the plan appropriate? That's, that basically was the point of finding it and reading it. Is it, according to what you read about what it's supposed to look like and what it does look like, do they match? I guess is kind of was the whole point of that exercise. And so that's where you write your little discussion one. Ours was laying, was right under the front counter where the state says it's supposed to be. According to what we know, everything looked great about it. Or no, we couldn't find it. We're not sure we ever wrote one. That's really what I'm interested in knowing. You'd be amazed. I used to have to check on those in CMS for 180 schools. You'd be amazed at how many schools when I'd walk in with them knowing that I was coming, couldn't have found it in a week. It was amazing. And so, especially in urban school districts where crises are likely to happen, and we did have to evacuate schools from time to time or put them on lockdown, it was amazing how many principals couldn't find their crisis plan or their emergency plan. And there's a lot of emergencies that happen that don't require you to evacuate the school, but you do have to do lockdowns and those kinds of things. And so it's very important that you know where that is in your building. It's supposed to be under the front counter, easily accessible to safety workers, emergency workers, police, fire personnel. so you can find it. There's also a crisis box. Let me see if I can find a list right quick of what should be in the crisis box. Let's see if I can pull that up. Let's see. It may be. Let's see. Let's see. Let me go back here. Let me go here. Yeah. Yeah, right here is your crisis management checklist. This should be in your administrative crisis box. It's supposed to be located under the front counter in the reception area of any public school in North Carolina. A student and staff roster with telephone numbers, addresses, people authorized. It's supposed to be updated every Monday. That sounds like a lot, but that's one of the jobs. It's actually in the job description of your data manager, what we used to call SIMS, and then ISIS, and then NCWIS, and now Power School. You have a data manager at your school. That's actually, the state wrote that into the job description, that they're supposed to run new copies of that and put it in the crisis box every Monday. There is a person who it is their job responsibility to do that. It doesn't do a lot of good to get a class roster from last semester. When we're trying to track down kids in a natural disaster, especially. Crisis, school safety and evacuation plans, including command points and locations. You're supposed to have 3 types of evacuation. A close one that you can walk to, one somewhere else in the city that you can be bused to, and then a campus one, someplace on your campus that you can, that's fire drill, basically. All right. When you have a fire drill, where you go? We all go to the ball field. All right. If the campus is not safe, where can we walk to? Oh, the church up the street. And then, if we get to be bused, we go across town to the Coliseum. You're supposed to have all that stuff is supposed to be. That's been decided for your school by the people in charge of that. So that's supposed to be in there again. On campus, short distance, and long distance evacuation points. A copy of emergency cards for each student and staff member, flashlight, bullhorn, portable phone. You don't have to have those old portable phones anymore. You just have to make sure everybody's got a cell phone. Paper and writing instruments, school crisis team badges, or distinctive clothing or for the school crisis team, such as a hat or vest. We like those little orange vests. Bottled water, first aid kit, bloodborne pathogen, rubber gloves, site map, and building plan. That has to be in your class. There's a big plastic box. You buy one at Lowe's with a lid on it, and all that stuff is supposed to be in it. Some people buy the clear tubs that have a top that go on them. They need to be, of an appropriate size to have all those things in it. So that every school has to have one of those. All right, so that was the thing that you were supposed to do. Now, for my part this week, let's get into the content of what I'm doing this week. We've covered that, so let's go to course content, course materials, and of course we're on week 2, North Carolina General Statutes. Okay, so when you click on that 115 link, it's going to give you this one right here. It's going to give you, I like this one. It has them all listed out, and you can go to individual ones. It has all 545 statutes concerning public education in North Carolina are found at this site. There are 115C, North Carolina General Statute 115C, starting with 1, are all the education statutes in North Carolina. They go through 545. Some are more important than others. I'm not going to walk you through all of them tonight, but you can Google this and you can come, or you can click on this and come to this site. There's different ways to access this. What I like about this one is it gives you the name and gives you a brief description. You can kind of see if you'd be interested in reading that one. It's not a bad idea to breeze all of these, especially things like open meeting laws. You can understand what that means. But the one we're going to start with tonight, and we're going to cover in depth, is the most important one for the purposes of this class and for this program and for you as a professional. And it is 115C 288. And that, of course, is powers and duties of the principal. So I'll click on that and we'll get started here. All right. First duty, of course, is to grade and classify students. What do we do in public school? We teach kids. You as principal don't teach kids, but that in a bigger sense, in a larger sense, the most important sense, what we do in public school is teach children. And so your job is to grade and classify, not teachers. See, that teachers have an issue with this, and this sometimes becomes a problem. They think when they give a grade that they give a grade. They don't really. The principal assigns the final grade always. The principal always makes the final decision as to what grade a kid's going to be in. Teachers can't say, I'm going to fail you, and you have to be back because you didn't pay your book, you didn't pay your book fee. Principal makes the decision who is promoted, who is retained, and what grades that they get. Principal shall have the authority to grade and classify pupils. Consider the pupil's work and grades, pupil scores on standardized tests. Principal shall not make the decision solely based on one standardized test scores. The principal's decision is to retain a child in the same grades, partially, but instead, then it shall be verified as accurate. You have to make sure your information is valid if you're going to hold a kid back. But you can't hold a kid back based on their EOG scores alone.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems that we have in the business is folks look for the easy way out or a way to let the process or somebody else take the blame for the decisions that they have to make. And one of the things that we got into, especially early on in standardized testing, is it wasn't my fault your kid got retained. He didn't pass the state test. Well, then it is your fault because it's your ultimate decision. It's not about, that test score on the state test is just one of the deciding factors. And finally, the state wrote in, it can't be the sole factor, it can't be the standardized, which is the EOG or the EOC in elementary school, cannot be the sole factor. That's just like I was glad to see that finally some people, that the law was passed this week that zero tolerance policies in schools are illegal. They've always been illegal, but the Supreme Court finally affirmed that this week. That you can't say, well, I didn't want to suspend your kid, but I had to because the policy said he had to be suspended, zero tolerance. That's what zero tolerance means, is that we don't have any leeway or we don't have any discretion on what we have to give you X number of days, or we have to give you this or have to give you that, or I have to fail you because you passed the test, you didn't pass the test. There's no such thing as zero tolerance. There's always extenuating circumstances, and that's one of those things as a principal. You just have to have the political courage to stand up and say, no, I'm not failing this kid. I don't care what the teacher says. It looked like he was passing all year long. Or on the other hand, you have to make the decision the other way sometimes. But that's your first and most important job duty. Second one, to make accurate reports to the superintendent and the board. And see, the thing that you got to remember is if you don't send in your data as principal, we don't have to pay you that month. I used to have to remind principals of that quite often. You know, where's your data? Where's your principal's monthly report, PMR? PMR, principal's monthly report, is the report of your daily attendance for the 20-day month. Everybody understands that in North Carolina, we operate on the modified accrual accounting system. We'll cover that later on this semester, maybe in a little more depth. But what that means is that when we talk about per pupil expenditures, the state doesn't give us the whole amount at the beginning of the year. Let's say, the state gives us $6,000 per pupil. They don't give us $6,000 at one time. They give us $600 10 times. And they don't give us $6,000 for every kid that's on the roll. They give us $600 every month for every kid that came. So if you've got 1,000 kids on the roll and 900 came last month, you get $600 times 900 kids. You don't get paid for the 100 that didn't come. That's the way the modified accrual accounting system works in North Carolina. So you got to verify every month how many kids attended and what your average daily membership was, or average daily attendance. We call it average daily membership. So that's got to be sent in every month. If you don't send it in, that throws a monkey wrench in the entire process of finance for public schools from North Carolina. That is the single most important document you do as a principal, is making sure that every month you get your PMR in on time. Probably second to that is the SAR, School Activity Report. And what that shows every month is what teachers are teaching what class and how many of them are in there. And that's where highly qualified is determined from, teachers teaching in field, class limits, duty loads in terms of how many students a particular teacher is teaching, how many duty-free minutes they have, how much planning time they have. All that is calculated out of that school activity report. It's basically a snapshot of your master schedule filled out with the numbers put in the boxes, is basically what the school activity report is. That has to be filed every month also. Again, if you don't file that, then the superintendent gets really hot, because that has to be filed, as in aggregate for the district. Both the PMR and the SAR, the principal's monthly report and the school activity report, are filed in aggregate for the district, because if the superintendent doesn't file those, he doesn't get paid. So it goes up the chain. So those are the required monthly reports. There's some annual reports like the Office of Civil Rights, all your suspensions, arrests of crime and violence, and those kinds of things. Those are put into Power School Daily, but then at the end of every year, I used to have to do a report. Let's see if I've got one hanging around here. Let's see if I've got one. Let's see. Aha. Here's what it looks like at the end of the year. You have to file a report, and this also goes to the Office of Civil Rights, the district, so that means that every school has to file, again, every principal has to file one to the superintendent, and then the superintendent then in aggregate files them to the state, and the state sends them to the federal. This is one for the LEA, that's local education agency, that's a school district. Verification form, this one's for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. This is school year, when did I say that was? This is school year 10-11, the last one that I did before I retired. It has all your acts of crime and violence categorized. The ones that are bold-faced are crimes of violence that count against persistently dangerous. transferred, offered to victims. Page 2, all the short-term and long-term suspensions, all your expulsions, all your impermissible uses of restraint and seclusion. That's like when seclusion's when you lock a kid in the courtroom or the closet. Restraints when you chain him to the radiator. We've had a couple cases of those. And then, of course, there's my name and as the deputy, and then the superintendent's name. And so these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. There's a lot of this kind of stuff that's due monthly. We made ours in Charlotte do this every month. That way we knew they knew where to find it at the end of the year. I couldn't depend on them to find it at the end of the year if I didn't make them do it every month. So we made principals turn it in every month. And then it was easy to do the aggregate at the end of the year because we only had like 2 weeks to get the aggregate done. It had to be done by certain, school was out June 15th and it was due in Raleigh June 30th. So we had them do it every month so we'd know it would be there. But that's what they're talking about here. When we talk about reports, those kinds of things, not just silly stuff, but reports, that kind. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that are either federal reporting or about money or about teacher contracts and the number of contracts we get and how much teachers get paid and all those things. That's the kind of reports that we're talking about. And it talks about records, requisitions, or payrolls, respecting daily attendance of pupil, payroll data sheets, all that you're guilty of a misdemeanor, class 1 if you do any fudging on any of that stuff. Now, what a class 1 misdemeanor means, it's not a felony, but in North Carolina, you lose your license to practice if you're convicted of a class 1 misdemeanor, which means you lose your job. So that's what we call, this is one of those death penalty things. If you get this wrong, then you have to go home, as we always used to say. There is no intermediate steps. There is no reprieve. There is no, how do I fix this kind of thing? It's got the state law built into it. If you get this wrong, if you don't do your PMR, or if you fudge your activity report, if you say one teacher's teaching in class when another teacher's teaching, and that happens from time to time, and we catch you, it's the death penalty. It's a class 1 misdemeanor, and we can't keep you. So it's important to know that. So that's what that one is about. To improve instruction and community spirit, the principal shall give suggestions to teachers for the improvement of instruction. Obviously, that means staff development. That means Marzano, that means walkthroughs. You know what that means. To conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards. Now, this is the most violated policy in the history of the state of North Carolina because most folks only read to conduct fire drill. They don't see the second half, which is inspect for fire hazard. It shall be the duty of the principal to conduct a fire drill first week of opening school and thereafter at least 1 fire drill per month. All right, let me show you what you're also supposed to do at that time. You're also supposed to take this checklist. No, wrong one. Sorry. This assessment inventory checklist. This is the one where when you do the, let's see, again, the law says inspect for fire hazard. You're supposed to use this assessment inventory. You're supposed to check your bus loading zones and drop-off zones to make sure there's no kids walking in the bus lot or there's no cars in the bus lot, that cars and bus zones are separated, all those kinds of things. You got signs and cameras and all that to direct people to the right area. No change with locks can't be used at any time. Doors can never be propped open. Exterior doors must be closed and locked all day, but can't be locked from the inside. the only entrance that's open to your building is the front door where you have cameras and security. All classroom doors are kept locked if they're unoccupied. That's the one that schools violate all the time. You never leave a classroom door unlocked if there's nobody in there. Areas are properly identified. Large areas like your cafeteria, auditorium, music, band rooms allow for adequate visual supervision, clear sight. That means you can't pile all your instruments up in the hallway in the band room, which is done in every high school in the state. It's all fun and games until the fire marshal comes. Two-way communication, cell phone, doors, mirrors, doors, boiler room, solid. Doors to the boiler room and power supply rooms are solid. They're kept closed and locked at all times. The appropriate number and type of fire extinguishers are fully charged in plain view, inspected annually. Principals never check those. They expire all the time. First aid and OSHA safety standards are properly located. Hazardous chemicals, including cleaning solvents, science and laboratory chemicals, are properly labeled, stored, and disposed of. I got a call. I had to go to a high school one time, and I got there and looked in the cafeteria, and the custodians had gotten some of those classroom dividers, things that you used to use to, kind of create sections in the room when you're doing multiple grouping. They'd got some of those in the high school, and they'd section them off a little place in the back of the cafeteria. And I went back there and looked, and every hazardous material known to man was back there in that little sectioned off area. No door, no security, no nothing. And the custodian said, well, they didn't want to have to walk all the way over to the custodial supply closet to get their stuff, so they just kept it right there in the cafeteria where kids were eating with the hazardous materials. That one cost us a few dollars. The fire marshal found that one. Chemical storage areas are labeled with appropriate hazard diagrams. Chemicals are not stored on the floor or the first two lower shelves of cases. You've got to have a shelf that's at least waist high off the ground to keep that stuff. Well ventilated storage. Chemicals are not stored on, again. Fire evacuation plans are posted in all occupied areas. Your red and green cards on the back of every door in every classroom. All of those things. This is what the fire marshal uses when he comes. Generally, you get a fire marshal visit one time a year right before school starts. This is the kind of things that they're looking for. The problem is most principals just do the fire drill and never do any of this stuff, and until something happens, and then we have some kind of an incident, and the fire marshal comes out and finds 24 violations we get fined for. But this is what it's supposed to look like. Every district has their own, but that's what it's supposed to be like. So make sure that when you see that, you see the second half, conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards. You're supposed to inspect each of the buildings in your charge at least twice a month during the regular school session. This includes cafeterias, gyms, boiler rooms, storage rooms, auditorium, and stage areas, as well as all classrooms. To keep the building safe from accumulation, traffic, and other hazards. You got to follow your paperwork. So that's enough on that one. But that one is a biggie. The second one, as it says right here, people don't do the visual inspection twice a month. It shall be the duty of the principal to discipline students and assign duties to teachers with regard to discipline, general well-being, and medical care of students. This one is the one that allows us to assign teachers to supervision, because that is a part of discipline and general well-being, is to make sure that all students and areas of the school are being well supervised. You'll get questions is how can you make me, monitor the hallway during class change? Well, that one right there says that you have to do it, because that's part of discipline and well-being of the school. Otherwise, you'd have chaos at class change.
Dr. Lamb, I have a question.
Yes.
Are these I guess statutes found in our book that
No,
we?
they're not. They're online. I've got a link created. Let me go back and cover that again. I probably wasn't clear. You see under week 2, under
Yes,
North
sir.
Carolina Juniors, you just click on that. It's all electronic now.
Okay.
These things change and update so often. You can Google it and pull them up. They're in different forms. I just like this one because it gives me a little blurb that goes along with them, and I know what
Okay.
they are. But this used to come out published as North Carolina Public School Law, and the book just kept getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and then they would make it out of cheaper and cheaper paper to try to to keep the cost down, and then it started coming out on CD-ROM, and
Okay.
now it's just all online. It's just too much to keep up with.
Okay.
So that's where you find these.
Okay.
All right. Now, it's kind of a similar thing. To protect school property, to report certain acts to law enforcement and the superintendent. You know that you got to report acts of crime and violence to law enforcement and the superintendent. Now, I know you can read the screen along with me. It says to report certain acts to law enforcement and the superintendent. Now, from the reading of that, which one of those do you call first?
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement. I can't tell you the number of times people call me as the deputy. And then the first thing I would ask them is, have you called law enforcement? No, I called you first. What does the law say? I don't know. Go back and read the law after you call the law first. Because some of the things that happen in schools are time sensitive and time critical. Evidence and other things can get destroyed, misplaced, or left behind. We don't ever want to be seen as dragging our feet. We don't ever want to be seen as being in collusion. That's the one thing that superintendents, fear more than anything else is that there was some conspiracy of some sort. Don't call me until you've called the law. I don't want, because, well, I called the superintendent's office and the deputy told me this or told me that or told me the other or not to call. No, we did not collude. The law is clear. You call if an act of crime or violence has occurred on your campus, then I expect that you will call the police first. Now, if you have the police on your campus, and if you're a secondary school, you should have a school resource officer. That means you get on the radio and you run them down to begin with, and then you call me. But don't call me first, because I don't want it to be seen that I in any way had anything to do or not do. There's an appearance of impropriety if you call folks inside first. It looks like you're cooking something up, even if you aren't. So it says clearly, you report to law enforcement first. Now, what are acts of crime and violence? That's a good question. We've got manuals online, North Carolina Discipline Reporting Manuals that goes into depth as to what acts of crime and violence are and what has to be reported to law enforcement. Now, I have tried to, I know I've got some copies of old ones, and I'm going to pull one of them up because otherwise I have to go full screen and I might lose you. So I'm going to pull up a copy of an old one. It's probably let's see. Let me go back here. No. I need to go over here. Here we go. Look at that. Did I lose you?
No.
Can you see the discipline reporting manual?
No, we still see the weekly schedule.
North Carolina disciplinary data reporting procedure. You can't see that?
Nope.
Ouch. That's what I thought it would do if I try to go online. You can't download those. Those come from DPI. They're a reporting procedures manual. You just Google North Carolina disciplinary data reporting. Now, I I planned for the eventuality that that might not work. And so what I have is a summary of what the acts of crime and violence are. And so here's that document. AWI is assault with injury, and they have a very graphic explanation of what that is. I had an issue where we got sued by an employee of one of our public separate schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. He claimed that he had been assaulted with injury and was trying to file a workman's comp claim. And according to the principal who reported, acknowledged that he had been assaulted, but she said he was not assaulted to the level that it would be counted as an assault with injury. And we went to the state manual, and it gives a very clear definition, and what had happened to him did fall within those standards, and so he did get his workman's compensation. You know, the principal was not happy about that for some reason. I never really understood that. But according to the definition, he was injured at that level. So all of these come with a very embarrassingly graphic for the sexual one descriptions of what they are. Assault with a weapon. You know, I had principals who claimed that, you know, because it wasn't a traditional weapon, it's the way something is used. If a kid picks up a brick and hits another kid up the side of the head with it, then that's an assault with a weapon. You know, normally a brick just laying there is not a weapon, but if it's used that way, a scissors, brick, a bat, something like that. We all know what the traditional ones, gun and knife kind of weapons are. Assault on school personnel, bomb threat, burning of a school building, that's BSB, death. One of my least favorite stories to tell is we had a young man at one of the high schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg to kill himself on campus. The bell rang at 2:15. He went out to his car. He sat there for a few minutes, we think, maybe listening to music. And about 2:30, he had a gun in the car, and he pulled it out, and he killed himself. The principal argued that he shouldn't have to report that because as a death on campus because it happened after the bell rang. Again, we go back to that reporting manual, which is very clear. It says if it happens on campus, it doesn't matter at what time, then you have to report it. If it happens in the middle of the night, you have to report it. If it happens on a Saturday, if the police are just chasing a car down the street and he runs off the road and comes into your parking lot and crashes in your parking lot and they find a gun and drugs in his car, guess what you have to report? A gun and drugs on your campus because it was on your campus. And so any of these things, kidnapping, alcoholic beverage, controlled substance obviously is drugs. And we have different categories of those, prescription or narcotics or those kinds of things. A firearm, a weapon includes a knife, dirt dagger, sap, you know, those kinds of things. Rape, robbery with a weapon, sexual assault, sexual offense, and indecent liberties with a minor. Now, rape, one of the things that you have to understand is students less than 16 years of age in North Carolina cannot consent. There was a national case recently, some New England prep school. Did you catch any of that one on the national news?
Mm-hmm.
Where these senior boys were always having sex with these 14-year-old freshman girls, and the boy's defense was that she consented. What an idiot. And his attorney was a bigger idiot for taking that defense to court. A 14-year-old girl cannot consent. She's not old enough. In the eyes of the law, she has to be 16. So one of the things you have to be really careful about in the school business is if you have students less than 16 on your campus, is they can't consent. It doesn't matter that they willingly where and willingly did what. They're not old enough to consent. And so if you catch them or somebody else catches them or sees them having sex of some sort, you better call the police. First thing to remember about any of this sexual stuff is you don't do any of the investigation. If there's an allegation of a sexual offense, rape, sexual assault, sexual offense, or indecent liberties with a minor, you do not do an investigation. You call the police immediately. This has become a hot button even at colleges. That they're even understanding now that legally they're having to bring the police in to do investigations. They're forming joint task force with trained people from the college and the police to do investigations, but the people from the college have to be trained by the police to do these investigations. But we don't do that in public school. We don't have the police come in and train our people in public school. So there is no, I'll go check on that. No, you won't go check on that. You call the police and they'll come check on that. But the big thing to remember is children under 16 can't consent, so it's not mutual. It isn't consensual sex. That's not appropriate. Now, if one of them is 19, then it's indecent liberties with a minor. So that's also part of it too. But I've got a thing here, and I'm sure you can read this. It says SBS students cannot consent. SBS students, which means self-contained, the law says that if you are mentally incapacitated, you cannot consent. SBS students are considered to be mentally incapacitated, self-contained EC kids. They're generally in some kind of an EC unit or a public separate school. I think there's one there in Raleigh. What's something Lake, Spring?
Longview.
Longview, that's it. Longview. We've got
Straight from my school.
Yeah. A child that's at Longview can't consent, don't care how old they are. Just like a child at Metro here in Charlotte can't consent no matter how old they are. And there's a lot of older students in those schools. We have a lot of 18 through 21-year-olds in our Metro school. I'm sure you do at Longview. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're 18, 19, 20, 21. Doesn't matter. They cannot consent to have sex because they don't have the mental capacity. Got to be careful, really careful with those students, especially if you have some on regular campuses. You cannot, you got to watch them like a hawk. You just got to. So what we did in Charlotte was when we built the new Metro school, we put bathrooms in classrooms so that they could be watched, could be monitored because of that very problem. Many of those students don't have any inhibitions, so you really got to watch them. So remember, self-contained kids, by the virtue of them being self-contained, cannot consent. I don't care if they're 21. They cannot consent. So you got to be really careful with that. Sexual assault, there is a very clear definition of that one. Sexual offense, there's a very clear, there's a difference in the two, but if either of those things happens, generally, in a general sense, without embarrassing myself, sexual assault many times is over the clothes and sexual offense is under the clothes. Some sort of penetration. You know what indecent liberties with a minor is? That means you've got somebody that's over 16 involved with somebody under 16. That's a no-no. So those are the acts of crime and violence that have to be reported to law enforcement all the time. There's a couple of other things that have to be reported. It's all in that manual. So it isn't like I didn't know. And they've even, in Power School, when you put these incidents in to report them to the state, they've even got a default system set up where it springs up and says, did you report it to law enforcement? If this really happened, did you report it to, again, another reminder. So, and one of the things that I found out, and I have a lot of friends in the police department here, especially we hired a lot of retired CMPD folks we created our own police department. We went away from security and formed our own police department. and got a lot of friends and they're good guys. But now I'm going to tell you right now, when you start dealing with police departments, especially small town ones, and we've got a few small towns in and around Charlotte where we had to deal with their police departments, if you foul up their investigation, they don't have any compunction about throwing you under the bus to the press or to the family of the victim. If you make that mistake. We couldn't find anything, but of course, by the time we got there, all the evidence was destroyed, and they'd tried to do some kind of investigation, and they had contaminated the evidence, and we didn't, it wasn't our fault that we couldn't charge we felt like something happened, but we couldn't charge the perpetrator. We feel bad for the victim's family, but, the school system did X, Y, and Z to foul up our investigation. They will do that in a heartbeat to shift the blame or, the anger of the victim's family back onto the school. And so they will throw you under the bus in a heartbeat. You've always got to remember that. As we continue to go here, school property shall include any public building, bus, public school campus, grounds, recreational area, athletic field, in the charge of the principal. Doesn't have a thing in the world about time of day, after the bell rings, before the bell rings. It's always, the school is always the school. Now, the one that principals don't like is bus. In actuality, the bus stop at the time that the kids are there, we're kind of responsible for that too, for what goes on. We have to report what happens at the bus stop. We had a child, my time having to be in charge, I only had one, thank God, because that was the worst thing ever. Had a child abducted from a bus stop and was sexually assaulted. That was awful. That's just absolutely awful. But yeah, you have to own that. That she had ridden a bus from her home across town to that bus stop. It was immaterial. It was our bus stop. The school tried not to report it. We didn't know she was coming on a bus over to our, it was our bus stop. It was your bus. It's our bus stop. We own it. That's just the way it goes. You don't have to agree with it, but that's you have to respect that. So yes, you have to report that. The principal or the principal's designee shall notify the superintendent or the superintendent's designee, that was me, in writing or electronic mail regarding any report made to law enforcement. That's why I said you call the law enforcement, then you call the superintendent's office. You ask for Dale or my equivalent, and you tell him or her. That's what happens next. And you should do it immediately. Shall occur by the end of the workday in which it occurred. And no later than the end of the fall. Now, in most school districts, you can't wait till the next day. It has to be that day, because the superintendent again has to pass then I've got to make a report to the board. So make sure that you get that one. Next one is to make available school budgets and school improvement plans. One of the things that I really get bothered by is when we send our students out to find their school improvement plan or the budget. You're going to need to find the budget, when you do your skip, and probably in this class you're going to have to find the school budget, and they tell you that we don't give those out. Yeah, you do. The law says very clearly, the principal shall maintain the copy of the school's current budget and school improvement plan, including any amendments to the plan, and shall allow parents of children in the school and other interested parties to review and obtain such documents. They're supposed to be in the front office of the school. You're not supposed to hunt them. So when a member of the public, a stakeholder, comes walking in and says, I'd like to see the school budget, you have to hand them a copy. Or I'd like to see the school improvement plan. And if a teacher or intern is not an interested person, I don't know who is. So this notion that they don't have to give, or we don't give those out, yes, you do, because the law says you do. Anybody can walk in and ask for them at any time.
Is a digital version legal? Because
supposed to.
I know, like, our school plan. We have a website that literally has everything available that you could go in depth and take a look at, like, what's active, what's been completed, what hasn't been completed.
Well, as long as in your front office, you've got a place where they can, an interested person could digitally, could get online and view that, then it's okay. The problem arises is when somebody walks in and says, "I'd like to go to the school improvement plan." Well, it's online. Well, can you show it to me online? Do you know we don't do that? Well, then I've been turned away. I've not been served. Law's not been followed. So you're supposed to have a computer in the front office dedicated, and most schools do, for parents over to the side or for visitors. And a lot of times they've got their ID system on it, but it's also supposed to be able to access their plans on it. So yes, it's okay to do it electronically, but you got to have a computer in the front office where the public can go in and look at it if they desire. Because folks would, the ACLU has claimed, and rightly so, what if you don't own a computer? Then you don't have, then you've been denied access. So yes, you can do that. The principal to evaluate licensed employees and develop mandatory improvement plans. Everybody knows you have to do your observations, your rounds of observation, and put them in, what's it called this year? It was McCrill, and then it became Power Source, and now, what was it they were telling me a while ago? It's now called NCEES. Is that the evaluation system? I read it. Nieces. That sounds like there's a company here in Charlotte called Nieces that makes sausage and liver mush. Nieces liver mush. So yeah, it's now Nieces. Everybody understands you have to do that. One of the things that you need to remember, and I've got a really good principal down in Wayne County, and I'm teaching down that way that'll come in and do it, is need to understand, and you need to get somebody to show you this when during your intern. It doesn't, that matrix of observation in rounds and who has to be done, that doesn't come from anybody already in the can. You have to build that as a principal. That matrix, you have to take your beginning teachers first. Obviously, they require the most, and then at different levels of experience. You have to have different numbers and different kinds of observations. All that has to be built into a huge matrix before the school year starts and submitted, and the state has to approve that basically. That's a big deal. That's a big deal, setting that thing up and getting it all done and getting it right to make sure that you're legal, that you did not miss anybody. Each school year, the principal assigned to a low-performing school who has not received an assistance team shall provide evaluation of all licensed employees assigned to the school. Principal shall also develop mandatory improvement plans and shall monitor employees' progress under mandatory improvement plan. Basically, what they're saying is that if you're in a low-performing school, everybody gets 3 a year, and some get 5, and the new ones get 5. Is what that one says. To transfer student records, the principal shall not withhold the transfer of student records. You can't say we're not going to send you records until you pay, your book fee, or you owe $4 in the cafeteria or whatever. You can't do that. Assign driving eligibility certificates and notify. All right, this is the one that gets people bent out of shape. Sign driving eligibility certificates, obtain the necessary written consent from parents, notify the DMV when a student who holds driving certificate no longer meets conditions. That's the one that will get you shot if you're not careful. A kid gets a driver's license in high school, he fails all of his classes, what are you supposed to report to the DVM? A kid gets in trouble, lose control, lose your license. There's several things that a kid can do at school or in public that can lose them their license, and the school is the point person on that deal that has to report that. Now, in larger districts like CMS, we had a person that was in charge of all that stuff, and she reported to DPI and DMV the kids who had violated the conditions of them having a driver's license before they're 18 and having those revoked until they're 18. She was hid, and nobody in the district knew who she was, because that she would have been a hated person. But as principal, you're responsible to make sure that information is transmitted to either that county person or district-wide person, or if you don't have that, to the DVM and DPI, so the DVM revokes their driver's license. There's a couple in there: lose control, lose your license if you misbehave and get suspended for certain things, like an act of crime and violence, an assault on a staff member, you're supposed to lose your license. If you get arrested for drugs, you're supposed to lose your license. If you don't come to school in the mandatory attendance, you lose your license. If you fail your classes, make a certain grade point average, less than a 1.0, you lose your license. There's a lot of things, so you need to make sure that you get everybody on your staff. Usually in a high school, you've got somebody in the guidance office who's keeping up with all that stuff. You better make sure, because what you don't want to happen is a kid that should have had his license revoked gets in a wreck and kills himself or kills somebody else. And then it's your fault that he was driving. Had that to happen, by the way. So that's one of those you need to be monitoring. You've got somebody in your guidance office that should be monitoring that. Establish school improvement teams. Every year, the principal shall ensure that a school improvement team is established for the purpose of developing, reviewing, and revising a school improvement plan. Just like we're teaching you to do through the evidence artifacts, a school improvement plan. And so that's it might be last, but it's the most important in terms of what your real function is as a principal, is to develop and work that school improvement plan every day. So that's a review of 288. Again, there are 545. You got all kinds of rules about discipline. Those we'll hit some more of these later on, but this is enough for tonight. I've got one more document here that I want to cover with you, and then we'll wrap it up. Here are the top 10 things that I think are important discipline-wise or legal-wise. This is law-wise. Legally, the 10 most important things that you better be on your P's and Q's about. No Child Left Behind said no school could be persistently dangerous, and they define that by these acts here, and we've already gone over them. You've got to make sure that you try to keep these kinds of acts down. 5 per 1,000 or 1 per 200 students is all you're allowed annually of these things to happen. So you have to be real careful. Now, there are antecedent behaviors to these that we can kind of predict. For example, if there's a lot of inappropriate display of affection, a lot of inappropriate touching, those kinds of things, before long you'll have some sort of a sexual offense. That's just the way it works. Sexual offense is touching related. Before you know it, it'll be under the clothes instead of over. We can map those things. Statistically, we can show you what's going to happen next in your building. If we see certain kinds of behaviors, if we see gang bandanas around your building, there'll be drugs and a weapon found before long or used on somebody, unfortunately. So it isn't like, we're just hoping this doesn't happen. There's no hope involved. There's a plan. You've got to stop the little stuff, and the big stuff won't happen. We can show you correlates. The data is very clear. You need to report all the instances of misbehavior on your campus to the state. They have a reporting system in Power School. You report all acts of crime and violence, which is obviously inclusive of those all incidents, to law enforcement. All right, we'll shift gears here a little bit. Prayer cannot be led by staff, nor can it be mandated by staff. It can be led by students or initiated by students. That is legal. So if kids meet at 7:30 at the flagpole before school starts in the morning, that's fine. but you can't make announcements to say we're going to have student-led prayer when obviously it's not student-led prayer. If the kid makes an announcement, that's okay. Now, this is the one that folks have the hardest time believing. Student dress and publications can be regulated to avoid school disruption. Folks think, oh, you can't censorship First Amendment, and then you don't have those. You can't do that. I mean, this is like you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You can't, certain dress items or lack thereof can be prohibited, and students cannot write whatever they want to in the school paper. I know they think they can, and they'll argue that they can, and their advisor, a faculty member, will argue that they can, but you can censor that as principal, and you need to sometimes. Because sometimes some of the things they write are slanderous, and so you have an obligation to stop that. Search and seizure, reasonable suspicion is the standard for school staff. Probable cause is the standard for police. It's very different. Strip searches are not permitted by school personnel of any kind. If somebody needs to be, if it's serious enough, somebody needs to be strip searched, then the police probably have probable cause, and we'll leave that up to them. But we're not going to have people take their clothes off. Reasonable suspicion is somebody comes in and tells me that Johnny's got a knife in his pocket. That's reasonable. That's all I need. That's reasonable suspicion. Probable cause. The police would probably want me to have seen the knife at some point, or would want to, or would want to speak to somebody who saw the knife, not just a report. That's kind of the difference. As I told you earlier, zero tolerance policies are not legal. That has been recently, within the last week, reaffirmed by the Supreme Court. That means that, you can't write in your code of conduct, if you do this, then we give you 10-day suspension with no right of appeal, or there's no extenuating circumstances. All that stuff is illegal. You can't do zero tolerance. Abuse, neglect, and harassment must be reported to school and law enforcement. The Family Education Privacy Act, FERPA, that's confidentiality of student records, including grades. You need to caution your teachers not to be talking about things that they see in a kid's folder, especially in open forums like the faculty lounge or the lunchroom. That's all private stuff. You see a lot of violations of that around the building. You can't be talking about those things. Due process. Tinker versus Des Moines in 1969 said that kids do have due process. That doesn't mean that they can't be punished for what they do. It just means that they get due process. That means they get to hear the charges. They get to give their side of the story. And so there's two standards, substantive and procedural. Did you follow the procedure, and did you give it to them, substance? So those are the standards. Arbitrary, and finally, in all legal discussions, the standard is always arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary is Sean and I are out back smoking, and Brandy catches us. She gives me 5 days out of school suspension, and she sends Sean on back to class and says, don't do that again. That would be arbitrary. Now, capricious would be is when the handbook said that the maximum for smoking is 1 day, and she gave me 5. That would be capricious when you give more punishment than the law allows. And so my final story for the evening, as our time draws to a close here, is I was doing a due process hearing for a young gentleman who brought 2 knives, not one, had brought 2 knives to school at one of our finer high schools. And he was 18 years old, and so his parents didn't come, and so instead they sent the family attorney, or they had allowed him to retain an attorney, and it wasn't his father's attorney. And so he had hired a young fellow just out of law school. He, I guess, related more to him, and so he brought him to his due process hearing to represent him. And I was very surprised when the attorney did not object to the school has to go first and bears the burden of proof. They brought the pictures of the knives and the witnesses and all those things, and he had the 2 knives at school, 2 large, not safe knives in school. And I was surprised he didn't object to all the material. And then I was very surprised when the attorney allowed the 18-year-old student to give his testimony, and he admitted that he had the knives. And so, he admitted what he had done. And so we were wrapping up and doing closing statements. And his attorney said, I want this case thrown out on the grounds that his punishment was capricious. The maximum that he could be given for having a knife on campus would be 5 days out of school suspension, and he was given 10. And that's when I, as the attorney or the hearing officer in charge, said to him, for the school district, the maximum punishment for a high school student is 10 days out of school suspension. I suspect if you will take out your handbook, if you'll look on the front of it, it says elementary school code of conduct, not high school code of conduct. And so kind of my final story for the day. So needless to say, he didn't win his first case out of law school. He kind of lost that case. He immediately appealed and tried to have his client's testimony struck from the record and all those things. But, of course, it was too late at that time. But the point of it is a valid one for school personnel. Know the rules. Carry that, know what the code of conduct is in your school district. Know what the range of consequences can be, and do not exceed the range of those consequences, because that's a no-brainer. You will lose on the basis of that when it gets appealed or when you go to court, because it is capricious. You're given more than you're allowed to do. So make sure that whatever grade level that you're working at, you find the appropriate manual and you read the manual. Find the manual, read the manual, and follow the manual. That's my summation of tonight is there's a manual for everything. I'm serious. DPI has written a manual. The police, there is a manual for everything. Make sure you find those, you read them, and you follow them, because nobody can give you permission to break the law. All those things that I covered tonight are the duties and responsibilities that you have. That means they're lawful. That means they are the law. You have to do those things. There's some manuals that go along with different sections of 288. Make sure, just like disciplinary data reporting, where you report to law enforcement and to the state, make sure you find that manual. They are online. Just Google North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual, and it'll pop right up. And it has all the rules and laws in it. There's a manual on attendance. There's a manual on everything. And if you get caught not following the law, generally the price is that you lose your job. The district can't support you if you break the law. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. The district can't support you if you're knowingly breaking the law, or even if you're unknowingly breaking the law. So make sure that you get the right manuals and apply them correctly is kind of the point of the story. Now, I could go on all night, but I know that y'all are wore down. But I have covered the material. I would like for you, kind of the remainder of my time, is to take some time and look at North Carolina general statutes. I covered 288 tonight, but there's a lot of other ones in there. Spend some time with those. Now, I'm not asking you to memorize any particular one, but what I'd like for you to know is what's out there. And so maybe at some point when something happens that you're involved in a case of some sort, or something happens, maybe a bell will go, oh, I remember there's something about that in the law. I can go back and look for that and make sure that I follow the law on that particular one, especially discipline. There's, 390, 115C 390, it's extensive. Exceptional children, all that stuff's in there. So spend some time with that. I won't go over it like I've done tonight and bore you to death, but that's kind of was supposed to be the thing to do. But I'll stop with 288. If y'all go in and look at 390 and some of the others, specifically 390, if y'all look at that one, I'll leave you to your own devices. After I get off here tonight, I'll see if I can post this thing to YouTube where the others can watch it. I appreciate the two of you coming out with me tonight. Y'all been with me now from the beginning. I appreciate that. Both of you are doing well. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.